We are really pleased to have Mariana Mirabile with us as our speaker. She's going to be sharing on the topic, what is blinding economists, and from neoclassical to ecological economics. Mariana, she's a member of WEAll. She's an ecologist, economist, and I'm so looking forward to hear everything that she's going to be sharing with us. For those who is they're joining us for the first time in this WEAll Talk, I just want you to know that they are meant to be a participatory event. We would, Mariana, of course, she's got the knowledge. She's going to be sharing with us a lot of information, but we're aiming for a good conversation, for a good chat, for exchanging ideas, suggestions, and questions. And so while she is talking, I'm going to be paying attention to what is written on the chat. So please share with you any questions or any ideas that you want me to tell Mariana while she's sharing information. But otherwise, please just open your mic whenever you want to talk. And when Mariana is asking, she's going to be asking us questions as well. So be ready for that. And, yes, welcome to this open space for all of us to share. And Mariana, over to you.
Many thanks, Anna, and many thanks WEAll for the invitation, and to all of you for being here. I'm very honored to be here. Let me maybe share my screen so that I have a presentation. And as Anna mentioned, I will be asking you a lot of questions. I will start with the first one. What do you think is blinding economists? Over to you already. Do you think something is blinding economists? Maybe you think economists are not at all blind.
Can I say something? Blinding economists. So I think we need to be a little bit more generous to economists, just a few of them anyway, because there are those who are still kind of in their comfort zone, because most of the world's economy are continuously saying, yes, we're measuring things by GDP. But what I'm finding more and more is that partly it's the language that we're using that makes a lot of economists, it's not that they're blind, it's just that they're feeling very uncomfortable about theoretical constructs which don't add up in the world of the sort of the GDP and sort of the macroeconomics that we have today. So I would say it's more about what is confusing economists. Why is it that they can't see the bloody obvious that's right in front of them? So that's my
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah, this is the purpose. That's why Mariana is throwing the questions, to hear people's opinion. And there are a few comments on the chat. Philip is saying they think it is a science, and some is unaware of reality of monetary system. Anthony Allen is most are still operating under the mandate of growth and thus not thinking broadly enough about what thriving looks like and adopting or producing theories that we actually need. Christopher is saying training. Mm-hmm. So there are many different comments in here. Please, I'm reading them. I'm really happy to read them, but I would love to hear your voices as well. And Mariana, I'm going to leave it to you. Just wanted to make sure that you had have seen the chat.
Yes, many thanks for those questions. And Jackie, I agree. The blinding was in a way as well a catchy phrase, but I do agree. I'm an economist myself, so I tend to agree. I could argue, however, that there is some blinding going on, and it has to do with the way our brain works. Today, I would like to discuss about the importance of the assumptions that are hiding behind our interpretation of the economy. This is, in my view, what is blinding, between brackets, economists. And the verb hide was not chosen by chance, because this is not what happens in reality. What happens in reality is this, or this. There are in this call as many realities as people, because we see reality through a filter that we are often not aware of, or if we are there, we rarely discuss. Could you tell me what the bar is? What do you think defines this filter through which we comprehend reality? Economists or non-economists, everybody. Do you have some ideas on what this filter can be? Again, on the chat, or feel free to take the floor.
Experience or worldview.
Yes.
Culture.
Yes.
Our political beliefs.
Where do our political beliefs come from?
Again, it depends on the experience. It can be a combination, experience, culture, but also of each one's background. So what we have experienced in the country that we live in, probably the income that we come from, because I guess if you come from a lower income, you might have a different point of view from someone that has a different economic background.
Yes,
absolutely. I guess also from education.
Yes, yes. One could say that actually the filter comes from the stories we have been exposed to. In a certain way, education tells us a certain story. Our experiences are stories. Our brain actually thinks in stories. Stories, in a way, are the shortcuts that our brain uses to comprehend reality. We cannot question everything all the time, and thus our reasoning is based on assumptions which depend on the stories we've been told. And Anthony says in the chat, imperfect information and heuristics taking leaps based on implicit bias. Yes, absolutely. Just to say that throughout our life, we are exposed to systems of stories, which we often call narratives. And narratives and stories are powerful because, and that's the reason why I'm talking about that in an economics talk, because they make some choices possible and others unthinkable. Not impossible, unthinkable, out of the radar, or simply crazy. Certain ideas look crazy with a certain filter. They may not be so if looked at with a different one. Power is thus with whomever controls stories. And since power is not distributed equally, we are not exposed to all stories equally. Some narratives dominate. For example, this photo looks normal to most of us. Cars parked in the street, normal, right? Maybe not. Maybe the public space could be used for something else than a giant car parking. The automobile industry controls the narrative of what a city looks like since the 20s, more or less. There are fascinating articles on how they did that. Cities could be very different if someone else controlled the narrative. With regard to the economy, what is the dominant narrative according to you? Do you have ideas on what you would say is the dominant narrative in economics?
GDP growth is good.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes.
We're all self-interested.
Yes. Sasha says consumerism. Yes.
That the needs are unlimited and the resources are scarce.
Yes. Other ideas?
Collective consensus.
We must spend our way out of the recession.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Growth reduce inequalities.
Yes. I could say
can solve problems.
Market can solve problems. Yes. Money as a necessary means of incentivizing innovation, collective consensus.
Mariana, Paul is raising his hand right now. Paul?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd say one of the narratives is this invisible hand that greed is good, that people acting individually automatically provide positive social outcomes, which I think has been refuted countless times, but I think that mythology still exists in people's minds.
Absolutely, Paul. Many thanks. Just an information. I don't see the videos, so if you're raising your hand, Anna, don't hesitate to interrupt because I don't see you.
Yeah.
I could say that since the 80s, neoliberalism is the dominant narrative, And when I talk about neoliberalism, I actually refer to many of the things that you are saying. I refer to the political project, to the set of ideas that started in the 40s with the Montpellieran Society, with economists such as Hayek or Friedman. These are some of the concepts of the neoliberal narrative, and you mentioned many of them. I won't have time to develop all of them right now, but we can do that together if of interest. Just to illustrate, there is, for example, the notion of individualism, which is that humans aim to maximize their own utility, they are insatiable, they only think about their own benefit, and they do that autonomously. That is, they are not influenced by society, they are rational individuals taking decisions autonomously. Individualism talks about what you mentioned, the greedy and selfish nature of human beings. And this takes me to an important point, which is that in a narrative, and in each of those concepts, there are certain things that are included and certain things that are excluded, that are not mentioned. For example, we are certainly greedy and selfish at a certain point, but we are also collaborative and altruist. Cognitive and evolutionary sciences prove us that. The collaborative and altruist side of human nature is, however, not mentioned in the neoliberal narrative and in the homo economicus notion that is behind the neoclassical economic theory, which is the theoretical background for neoliberalism. And this is an important point because when a narrative becomes too dominant, which is the case for the neoliberal narrative, what is excluded from the narrative no longer exists. Communication experts say that we do not talk about what we see, we only see what we talk about. And also that I'll see it when I believe it, and not the other way around. Since the 40s, the Montpellieran Society pushes their ideas through the creation of think tanks, political contributions, TV series, the influence of universities' curriculum, etc. In universities, they pushed the analytical framework that provides the theoretical basis for neoliberalism, which is the neoclassical analytical framework. I don't know yourself, but in my case, I am a neoclassical economist by academic imposition. This is what I thought when I left university, and for many years after that, this is what I see now. But I see that honestly by pure chance. I discovered that by pure chance. I was not exposed to that in university. These other branches of economics were not represented in the places I've worked in, and I was probably not curious enough for years. But just to say that the homogeneity of thought and of assumptions that results from neoliberal very successful efforts to push for the neoclassical economics in economist education is, in my view, a big part of what is blinding economists. The neoclassical analytical framework is one way of seeing the economy. There are others. And which one we choose determines the question we ask, and thus the responses we get. To illustrate this, I will focus on one assumption of the neoclassical analytical framework, one assumption that is largely unquestioned and that results, in my view, in very dangerous policy decisions, one assumption that you mentioned, that economic growth is always good. I will briefly describe where these assumptions come from in the neoclassical analytical framework and show how, if we change the filter and put an ecological economist filter on, this assumption may no longer hold. Ecological economics, not to be confounded with environmental economics. If I can explain the difference if useful. But just to say that, maybe I just explained it, but environmental economics adds the natural resources to the neoclassical analytical framework, basically tries to internalize externalities. Well, the ecological economics framework is an analytical framework that is different from the neoclassical framework. And that, again, changes the questions we ask. Economic growth is always good. What does it mean to you? in economic terms or in general terms, what does it mean?
That you're not good enough now and you need more. You're not satisfied enough. You're not being, I don't know, enough, and you need to grow more. And also it could be because the population is growing, so you need a certain percentage of growing also. Both possibilities, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Are there ideas on what it means?
There are a few comments on the chat. Mariana, more is good on the goal. We need to keep growing. More of something is always better. You can always do better.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We could translate it by saying that actually it's all of that actually. But if we could translate it by saying what we obtain from human-made capital is better than what we need to give up for it. If that is the case, economic growth is always good. In economic terms, the marginal benefit of an additional unit is always higher than its marginal cost. This is an assumption we do at the macroeconomic level. We never assume this at the microeconomic level. At the micro level, we ask ourselves the question on where the marginal cost and the marginal benefits meet. Because where they meet, we stop. That is how we stop eating pizza. That is how some of you may have decided to have a garden rather than build 2 extra rooms in this space. At a certain point, we stop because what we need to give up for is more costly than what we get for more. Now, at the macroeconomic level, we never ask this question. We assume we know the response. We assume that we know that human-made capital, having more of it, is always better than what we need to give up for it. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we do that assumption at the macroeconomic level and not at the microeconomic level? Do you have any ideas on why that can be? It actually has to do with the analytical framework of classical, neoclassical, and environmental economics. As you know, in classical economics, the economy is represented through the input-output model. It's the first thing one learns in an economic course. There are inputs that are transformed through agents of transformation, which results in output, which is what we measured in the GDP. Natural resources are an input to the economy, if we are lucky, because they may also be excluded. And the economy is the whole, with W. I'm not sure I pronounce it properly. Being the whole, when it grows, it is thought to impose no opportunity cost because it displaces nothing. It expands into the void. And of course, classical economists putting together this analytical framework understood that the economy does not expand into the void. They were not crazy. They knew that every man-made product is a physical transformation of ecosystem into economy. They knew that we do not produce anything, we only transform what is already there. But the world was so empty then, we were so small compared to the environment, that this assumption was not an issue. The void was almost a good proxy of reality. We were, in any case, not capable of fishing faster than the rate of reproduction of fish reproduction. We were not capable of producing more waste than what the earth could absorb. There was no issue. Now, thanks to economic growth, to technology, reality changed. The limiting factor today are probably no longer the boats, it's the fish. But we are still investing in boats because we still think that more human-made capital is better. Reality changed, the limiting factor changed, and our analytical framework has not adapted. I would argue this is what is blinding economists from asking the type of question we should be asking. The assumption, go ahead, Anna.
No, I just wanted to let you know that there is a comment from Peter on the chat. In terms of value, the whole economy is always an abstraction facilitated by the macro case. Regardless of how small the world appeared, there were always others who perished once deemed expendable external cost.
Mm-hmm. Many thanks, Peter, for the comment. Where was I? Yeah. Basically, the assumption that more man-made capital is always better than what we need to give up for it, and thus that economic growth is always good, may no longer be true if the limiting factor change. In the same way that 2 extra rooms may not be better than a garden if you already have a lot of rooms. Ecological economists argue that seeing the economy as a subsystem, as a part rather than as the whole, is the first step towards sustainability, because it changes the questions we ask, and thus the potential answers we get. This change implies changing a part of the filter through which we comprehend reality and comprehend the economy. With the economy as a subsystem, we can see that when the part expands, it imposes an opportunity cost, as the natural environment must shrink to make room for it. The economy and the environment are actually part of the same system. One is not an input to the other. They are not separate from each other. Now, why is it an issue that the environment shrinks? Why is it problematic if the economy gets too big? That's a question for you.
I think you said it when you said the resource, the limits are the fishes and not the boats. I think that's answered.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Actually, when we expand the size of the economy, we lose life support systems, which we often call ecosystem services. And if we do that too much, and I could argue that climate change, the mass extinction of a species, and many other indicators suggest we are, then economic growth ends up costing us more than it benefits us. Economic growth may well be uneconomic. That is, the marginal benefit of an additional unit may be lower than the marginal cost. A little bit like the extra slide of pizza that we know we shouldn't have eaten, in a way. Now, the idea that economic growth can be uneconomic is so unthinkable with the neoclassical filter that even Google does not find the word. The word is not part of the dominant narrative. The idea does that do not exist. We are blind to it. My key point here is not to say that we should stop economic growth everywhere. My point is just, let's ask ourselves the question in the first place. Let's try to understand what it implies at the systemic level to have an economy that keeps growing on and on. Let me just conclude by saying that the stories in our culture give us beliefs like growth is good, humans are greedy by nature, the things that you mentioned in the introduction. And these beliefs define what is possible and what is unthinkable. And thus, the options that seem feasible to organize society in the future. These beliefs lead us to policy choices like focusing on GDP growth, or like policies like green growth that reinforce and sustain those stories. We get into a feedback loop, a cycle that is currently, in my view, a vicious one, but can be a virtuous one as well. I could argue, and I'm certainly not the only one arguing this, that we need to question the neoliberal filter and start asking questions which answers can take us towards a different direction than the one we are headed to. We can, of course, discuss the need to change direction or not. That's an assumption on my side. But if we agree that we need to change direction, I could argue that we will only start seeing options for really doing so when we start questioning this unique story that is the neoliberal story, and we start coming up with a new one, as a story can only be replaced with a story. I would just like to finish with one phrase, and just to say that when it comes to economists, I could argue that this story is in a way the neoclassical analytical framework, which is what I would argue over 90% of economists are taught in universities. Let me finish with this phrase that I think is pretty pertinent for today's situation with the COVID crisis. I thank you for your attention, and let's discuss.
Thank you so much, Mariana. Thanks. So, thank you. I was going to ask you just that so we could see all our faces. And I just see question about neoliberal economics. What do you think of Jubilee? Wipe out all debt and reboot the economy from there. Who would the winners be? Who would the losers be?
I'm afraid I don't have a response to that, but I'm sure someone else in the audience will be able to respond.
And I just want to say that you can open your mic now. You don't need to wait for the chat. You don't need to, this is what the talk is about, is now is the time for us to open mics and share your thinking, your maybe answering to that question that Paul put on the chat, or maybe Paul, you want to share as well. Anybody, just jump in.
I asked the Jubilee question. I teach ecological economics. Thank you for that talk. I'm going to steal the Google search on economic growth. You've provided me with cool little things, a lot of stuff I'm familiar with. I present that to my students, this idea of Jubilee, where they used to do it. The Pope would do it. All debt goes away. And I think the losers would be Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, everybody with lots of money. And the winners would be anybody whose debt exceeds their net worth. And I think it's an interesting proposal that is getting a little more traction in the media. And I'm just curious what people think of that idea and if it's something we might want to push for as WEAll.
I don't understand the idea of loser and winners. We are all different. I mean, everybody should have the space, and not because of that one is the winner and one is the loser.
Oh, well, I mean, money is debt, right? So if you have a pile of money, then people owe you something. And if you have a pile of debt, you owe people something. If debt goes away, people that are in debt, it's a way of reducing inequality, I think, right? So I think there would be winners and losers. There were people that, I think the people in power do not want Jubilee to be spoken about. It's hard to, find anything about Jubilee, just like it's hard to find anything about uneconomic growth.
Any other thoughts, any questions for Mariana? Any other ideas that you would like to share?
Mariana, I'm wondering if you have studied much monetary systems and the debt-based monetary system and how you connect that to ecological economics.
Because it's kind of connected, but I won't get into the finance side because it's very much a monetary system question. But I think there's a huge opportunity, like every single review and webinar we're seeing at the moment is just focusing on the negative, just focusing on GDP, only talking about when we're going to revert to what was wrong. So the point of this and what I'm learning is that we need to change the narrative fast. And that's down to every single one of us, and there's a multiplier opportunity in that, that we can bring people on the journey with us, for want of a better phrase. But that's what excites me about this collective of people. And what I'm learning from WEAll is how can we come together to, without pitchforks, change the narrative, because lobbying, it's not doing anything. So we need to compassionately come forward with this. As somebody said at the beginning, is let's be more compassionate towards economists because they're still learning as well. So that's my thought.
Maybe just to say that on monetary policy, on debt, reboot, etc., I could argue that it all goes back, and I could actually, my impression when we have these type of discussions is that we often get to the technical part of things very, very quickly. Well, anything that we suggest, be it on monetary policy, be it on debt cancellation, it all depends on actually on the assumptions we have in the first place, and on whether the Jubilee idea may look crazy. And if it looks crazy, it's mainly because of the assumptions and of the filter we have been taught. And that's why I tend to agree with what you said, Sorcha, that there is a lot to do about changing the narrative, changing, if we keep thinking that humans are greedy anyways, and that this is the best system that we can have, that is the best system we will have. But maybe humans are not only greedy in the first place, and then a lot of opportunities open in monetary policy and in every other aspect, I would argue.
And so they have to be able to see what the option is, and not just creating another number for the sake of a number, because that's not going to work out either. It'll become the next GDP, and we don't want that. We want balance. So we want multiple options and multiple focus. I came off a webinar earlier today about the number of sovereign countries that have been downgraded in the last number of months, and it's the most that's ever happened. So listen, the monetary system is kaput, so we're working on Build Back Better, something new.
One question, Mariana, have you written Yuval Noah Harari? Haven't? Have you?
I know that Ari, and I have read him. I appreciate a lot his analysis of history, because he talks a lot about stories. I know a little bit less his latest work on the algorithm, and I have mainly read Homo sapiens, basically. And I think he talks a lot about stories.
Yeah, but he doesn't speak about the assumption that we already understand. I mean, what you have talked today, it is exactly the lack of his work. Okay, so it's another story, because I'm here in Israel, so I could reach him. But that's another story.
I'm sorry, it's just you're cutting off. If you can write it down on the chat, that would be really helpful, if that is okay. So Philip, I noticed that you have a question on the chat. I don't know if you want to say it, and then Christian, I'll give you as well. You will be the next one. Thank you for raising the hand.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, I've got two questions really, actually. Firstly is around how can we best create an alternative narrative? How can we together all the stories of where we are seeing alternative, sort of more ecological economies coming into being? How can we spread those to really create an alternative narrative? The question is how can we educate people to sort of understand some of the basics about how our money system works, what money is and how it's created? Because I think our level of understanding is, well, my understanding certainly is abysmal, and we don't get any education about it, which is why we allow ourselves to be bamboozled by what we're told by our politicians and economists.
Collect a few other questions, if there are, as you prefer.
Yeah, thanks. I have two questions to you, Mariana. I missed the first 2 minutes, so maybe you said something on that. My question is, if you, in your study of neoclassical economics, posed this kind of questions to your professors, and if yes, or your doubts, and if yes, what were their answers to that? And the second one is, I know many neoclassical economics, and when I ask them about Homo economicus, they say, no, we do not teach that humans should behave like that. We just assume that they behave like that. Do you know or did you ask them ever why they assume that and not different qualities like the ones you mentioned? These are my two questions to you.
Many thanks. I will try to go into order. Just go back to what Miguel was asking. Indeed, Harari talks a lot about stories and how stories help us collaborate. He focused on that a lot. On the assumption side, I don't remember, to be honest, so I cannot say much. But on the assumption side, what I would like to say is that cognitive sciences is very clear about the fact that we have a confirmation bias mechanism, so that we ignore information that we don't like and that we give more emphasis to information that we do like. That for our brain, values is much more information than data. So we do tend to, and that we also have this kind of tribal brain that protects us from asking too many questions in a way. So in a way, all this part on assumptions is based on these results on cognitive sciences that tell us a little bit that our brain doesn't help us that much. We need to be aware of those limitations so that we can be critical thinkers and ask about our own assumptions, basically. On how we create an alternative narrative, there are a lot of people working on that. WEAll is one of them. There is a narrative cluster. There are institutions like NEON in the UK, the Narrative Initiative in the US, Frameworks Institute, the Topos Partnership. There are many, many institutions that are working on that. I could argue that I'm personally working on a project with a group of economists where we're trying to link academics with communication experts, with activism, because what happens a lot, and this is, I haven't been in academia for years, but from what I hear and from what I kind of see as well, is that actually there is a huge disconnection between what academia does and actually the movements that influence change in society. Academia tends to have this neutral position, whatever that means, but it tends to have this neutral position where actually change is not influenced actively. How can we create an alternative narrative? I could argue that we need to learn a lot from neoliberals, because that's exactly what they did. Neoliberalism was crazy in 47. It was crazy for decades until it was not crazy anymore in the 80s. And they did that through TV series. Friedman was really a celebrity, a TV celebrity. They invested a lot of efforts to actively influence public opinion. So I could argue that if we want to work on narrative, we need to learn how to communicate actively and how to do that strategically, because that's how in a way we are trying to change a narrative in a complex system, and a complex system, you cannot change a complex system. You can only influence it towards certain directions or the others, and there are groups trying to influence it in one direction, groups trying to influence in another direction, and whomever is more efficient will win, basically. So in a way, I could say that it's not easy, I could say, but there are a lot of people trying to do that, and trying in a way, indeed, to educate people on the basics. Some of the studies, for example, NEON does. They go on the street and they ask, it's mainly in the UK, they ask people, what is the economy? What is the purpose of the economy? How does it work? And they see that actually there is a lack of understanding. There is a lack of understanding. They see that there is as well this notion that the system is rigged anyways, and that we cannot do anything about it. And they identify that as a key intervention point, saying that actually we can reprogram the economy. And they provide as well a lot of metaphors on actually bringing the economy back in track, or reprogramming the economy, so that people see that one can do things to change it. Very interesting stuff. I can put some links in the chat if interesting, because they are doing excellent work on that. Christian, I haven't been at the university for a while, so I haven't asked this to any professor, but Herman Daly, he's an ecological economist. In several of his papers, he say, if you're at university, ask your professors. So if there are people here at university, ask your professors. But I personally haven't. And on the Homo economicus, I agree that they assume, what I find funny is that the assumption that humans behave like that actually has enormous implication on the results we get, but as from the response you describe, they don't question it. So they know that people do not behave like that, but they feed into a model an information that is false at the end of the day, and that's okay. To me, it's very difficult to understand why that is okay. Actually, I don't know if you had a response to that on the discussion you had.
Mariana, I think Amanda said she would like to make a comment on what Christian asked, and then I'm going to give the turn to Peter and Anthony. Amanda?
Yes, so I'm loving this conversation, by the way. This is fantastic. I just wanted to sort of like pick up on what you were saying, Mariana, and also to Christian's questions. I think that one of the major things that's missing within economics education now is the history of economic thought. It used to be part of the core curriculum where you needed to understand where the assumptions in economics and where the theorists who came up with them, the sort of historical context within which they wrote, right? So like during a particular period where a lot of the classical economists came up with these assumptions, it was a lot around like a lot of fixation on human nature debates, ideas from Hobbes, influence from like Christian, Judeo-Christian assumptions to human nature. There's like a lot of context within this that then in the 50s turns into maths, right? And once there was maths, and there's like, you just stop us like even questioning the assumptions because it's about the models. It's not around the philosophy that's sort of underpinning it and the purpose for that. And so one of the, I think the really positive things we're seeing in the movement are students really demanding more courses in the history of economic thought. So I remember reading that Amartya Sen was saying that at Harvard, there was like a lot of demand by students to really want to get back to those sort of socio-economic foundations of where these ideas came from and where these writers were writing, because I don't think we do justice, you know, especially to like Adam Smith and people like this, like what they were talking about considering the time period. So.
Thank you, Amanda. Christian, I don't know if you want to add anything or...
Yeah, thanks to both of you for your answers. Maybe just something curious or interesting. I ask neoclassical economists, why do you not assume that humans are collaborative, altruist, generous, and caring? Because there's a strong argument for that, that the term economy comes from the ancient Greek word oikonomos, which was earlier and which was a housewife first. It was a woman. And second, the values around the ancient Greek oikonomia, these values were cooperation, sustainability, sufficiency, and take care of each other. So if they modeled homo economicus according to the ancient Greek meaning of oikonomia or oikonomos, then actually it would be just the opposite of what it is since 1888. This is the first time when the term of homo economicus appeared, and it has nothing to do with the ancient, with the meaning of the ancient Greek term economy or oikonomos, and that would just be, I'm just curious how they built their assumptions, but both of you answered it quite well. So I just wanted to add that as a spotlight. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, I know that you raised your hand some time ago, so your turn.
Thank you, Anna. Lovely to see everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to maybe reflect back rather than raise new issues, but I'm just thinking that sometimes there's a risk, I think, when we talk about narratives, that it's a way to comfortably elude or avoid issues of ideology. I think growth, as it's discussed within the academy, we sometimes avoid the fact that the neoclassical form of economics is essentially a very successful ideology. They say the most successful ideologies are those that no longer appear ideological. So I just wonder if we need to always address questions of power, ideology, and ask that question that someone raised in the chat. Always ask that question about who is the we when we might make assumptions. And I also want to refer back to I think the very compelling case that Wolfgang Sachs has always made, that a core part of the ideological function of growth is to disguise inequality and the dynamics of accumulation in the capitalist system. And I wonder sometimes if our disciplinary boundaries inhibit some of those questions and elisions in our discourse. Thanks.
I don't know if anybody would like to comment on what Peter just said.
Yes, I would, but if there is space, yeah.
Next is going to be Anthony, so go ahead.
Great. Yeah, because you're opening the issue of ideology, in my understanding, the biggest blind spot or blind dimension of neoclassical economics is that they think they are objective and value-free. When they are confronted with our models, a well-being economy, a sustainable economy, a steady-state economy, an economy for the common good or others, they dismiss them all as normative approaches, whereas their subject is science, is objective and non-ideological. But ours, of course, are ideological. And this is the core of the ideology, that ideologists consider themselves and their ideologies as value-free and objective, or science, and other ideologies or just systems, value systems. I think the better word is these are different value systems, as normative, political, ideological, as a kind of rhetoric battle. And what was very helpful for me in this context is that Tim Kasser and others, they analyzed the value system of neoclassical economics or neoliberal political economy. And it's a very clear and identifiable value system of egoism, competition, materialism, pursuit of financial goals, and GDP growth. So these are 5 very clear values. It's a value system. It's just a different value systems, but their blindnesses, and I would like to strengthen Mariana's approach, their blindnesses that they do not say, these are our values and you have different values. Let's discuss about these different values. They still affirm that their approach with these 5 core values is value-free. And others like us who do have values, yes, we have these values, and we support these values, and we also try to spread these values. We are non-scientific, we are ideological and political, and they have a very strong stake with that argument, because this blindness is so widespread that many others believe them. And it's not very easy to make others see that it's was it Miguel who said it? It's a pure ideology.
This has been really amazing, and sharing space with all of you is a real gift. Mariana, listening to you talk about story, the one thing that I can't get rid of is just this question of, can we change the economic narrative without first or in parallel changing the story of money? What money is, what it means, how it stores value, how it moves. Is that possible? And then I think the second piece to this for me is just a request for recommendation from you for books or ideas, thinkers. I've been following John Fullerton and Kate Raworth and Charles Eisenstein for a while, Harari obviously, but who else should be on that list for us?
Mariana, over to you.
Yeah, many thanks for all of that. Before I forget, here I just shared, what I just shared is actually a summary of many of the articles I read on narrative change, on the analysis of neoliberal narrative, and there is donut economics in there as well, etc. It's not on the economic side. It's actually more on from communication experts towards economists. So it's not about economic theory. It's more about the importance of narrative and of assumptions. And I have another one on cognitive sciences. If of interest, there is very interesting stuff that I think we very often forget, and that we should keep in mind while communicating. There were a lot of comments, so I will just try to give just maybe what Amanda was suggesting. Absolutely, history of economic thought is no longer in many curriculums. In addition, you mentioned the group, and when you mentioned that group, I thought about Rethinking Economics, which is this group that is fighting for pluralism in universities, and that's where one of my slides came from. There is a website that is called Exploring Economics, which is great, very nicely done, that explores all of the branches of economic theory. About ideology, actually, I said that I didn't speak with a lot of neoclassical professors, but I do speak with a lot of neoclassical economists, and actually I get to be the ideological because I'm the non-neoclassical, right? So actually, I could argue that talking about ideology, by the way our brain is constructed, I'm not sure at which point it is useful, because no one likes to be called ideological. And in a way, it becomes a confrontation, while if one tries to actually uncover the assumptions, rather than actually just discuss about the assumptions, it becomes in a way more neutral. Which takes me to the comment from Christian on the objective and value free. Absolutely, there is a lot in the neoliberal narrative about what is natural. Humans are greedy, that is natural. Markets are natural and impartial. That's the natural part comes in a lot. And actually what they do is that they have, what they suggest is value free and natural. The opposite is impartial and unnatural, basically. And you have people like Thatcher that say there is no alternative. There is no alternative because what we are suggesting is natural. And they do comparisons that they use communication and brains and cognitive sciences very well, I would say. Can we change the economic narrative without first changing the story of money? I think if we need to rethink the economy, we need to rethink the way we think about money. And for example, what Neon finds out by asking people what they think about the economy is that the economy equals money, while it is not necessarily. How many times actually have we started a discussion, and I haven't even asked the question in this one because I wanted to keep it shorter, but what is the purpose of the economy? Actually, what is the purpose of the economy according to, and there I would say we could start seeing how our ideology, how we are, we need to actually readapt the economy according to what we think should be the purposes. So to your question, I would say we need to change the story of money, or at least the place money takes in all of this.
So I wanted to give the space before we wrap up. I noticed that you were adding many comments, and I just want to make sure, because I know that you have a question that it was similar to another person. I just want to make sure that your questions were answered, because I have read, but I don't know if I have kept track of all of your comments. Do you want to open your mic and make sure? I just want to make sure.
Sure. I was really just curious whether or not ecological economics has anything specific to say about monetary systems, monetary policy, and how new units of money should be created and put into the system, if not using a debt-based monetary system that we have today. There are lots of alternative proposals on the table, and I'm curious if ecological economics has anything to say about it. If not, that's totally fine.
Yeah. I'm not the right person to answer. I'm sure there are other ecological economics in this call that could answer that better than myself.
If anybody could
thank you
that question, it would be amazing. If you have, just want to make sure that okay, nobody's raising their hand. Okay, Sam, so this is maybe one of the questions that we can put on the citizens platform, and we can show to others to figure it if we can get that information in there.
Great, thank you.
So
really appreciate the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. So before, is there anybody who would like to add anything before we wrap up and we call it call the end? Is there anything that you are keeping that you don't want to keep it for yourself, that you want to ask, that you want to say, that you want to share with all of us before we go?
I think it was amazing, really. I think we should put a meeting, a weekly meeting, to go forward and really work together. I would do that.
Okay, so, well, this is one of the things. I just want to make sure that you all know about the WEAll Citizens platform, because sometimes these conversations that starts on our monthly WEAll Talks, it continues in the platform, and they even open discussion forums on specific topics, and Mariana is in there, so she would be willing as well to continue answering if you want to continue the conversation. So don't forget that. And a kind reminder as well that our next WEAll Talk is kind of related, because we are going to be so lucky to have Martin Otin and Kay, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to pronounce this last name right, Chastel, and they're going to share with us their case study as they show how do we get people to question the status quo. That is going to happen on June 25th. They're going to tell us their story on a performance that they created in Germany to actually make people question themselves and trying to change the story that we're telling each other. So somehow it's related. I hope that you're going to be all interested. I'll be putting the information on the platform. I'll be sharing the invite with everybody. And I want to say thank you, Mariana. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. Thank you so much to everybody for being here. It's been a pleasure to share this WEAll Talk with all of you. And I hope I'll see you next month.